Now watch my revenge!
The mahogany doors of the High Court didn't creak. They groaned under the weight of 3 years of silence. Elena stood in the vestibule, her reflection in the polished brass handles unrecognizable. She was in T, the girl who had been exiled to the countryside estate with a single suitcase and a signed NDA. She was a ghost returning to haunt the living. Welcome, story lovers. Before we dive into today's suspenseful story, please support the channel by liking the video, subscribing, and sharing your city in the comments below. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and old money. Julian sat at the defense table, his profile as sharp and cold as the diamond cufflinks she had bought him for their 2nd anniversary. He didn't look back. He was whispering to his lead counsel, a smirk playing on his lips, a look of a man who had already bought the verdict. "He thinks you're here to beg," Marcus, her lawyer, murmured beside her. "Don't give him the satisfaction of a tremor." "I stopped trembling a year ago, Marcus," Elena replied. Her voice was a low, steady chime. As she took her seat, the gallery buzzed. The socialites who had deleted her number the moment Julian branded her unstable were now leaning forward, their eyes scanning her thrift store suit for a sign of weakness. They found none. The judge entered, a silver-haired woman named Vance, who looked like she had seen every trick in the book. Case 402, Valerius versus Valerius. Claim of marital asset concealment and wrongful abandonment. Julian's lawyer stood up immediately, his voice booming with practiced condescension. "Your Honor, this is a farce. A desperate attempt by a woman who breached her postnuptial agreement to extort a grieving husband who only sought to protect her from her own mental fragility." Elena felt the familiar sting of the fragility card. For years, Julian had used that word like a silencer. The plaintiff claims, Judge Vance read from the file, her brow furrowing, that the $200 million divestment from Valerius Holdings occurred 48 hours before the divorce filing, and that the funds were moved to an offshore entity under a name she only discovered last month. The room went silent. Julian's smirk faltered, just for a millisecond. He finally turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto Elena's. They weren't filled with love or even hate. They were filled with a warning. "Stay in your place, Elena." "The entity is called the Nightingale Trust," Marcus stated, standing up. "And we have a witness who can verify exactly who signed the transfer papers." Julian leaned over to his lawyer, his knuckles white. "She's bluffing," he hissed, loud enough for the first row to hear. "She has nothing." "Your Honor," Marcus continued, "we would like to call our first witness to the stand, someone who has been inside the Valerius household for a decade." The side door opened. A woman in a simple gray uniform stepped out. Julian's face went from pale to ashen. It was Clara, the housekeeper he had supposedly fired for theft 2 years ago. Clara took the Bible, her hand shaking. "I have something," she whispered. Something he thought he burned. Before she could speak, the heavy back doors of the courtroom swung open with a violent bang. A man in a dark suit stood there, breathless, holding a red folder. "Stop the proceedings," he shouted. "There's been a filing error that changes everything." The courtroom erupted into a sea of hushed whispers. Julian stood up so abruptly his chair scraped against the marble floor like a scream. The man at the back, a junior clerk from the city registrar's office, didn't look at the gallery. His eyes were fixed solely on Judge Vance. "Sit down, Mr. Valerius," Judge Vance commanded, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. She beckoned the clerk forward. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" Elena felt the air leave her lungs. She looked at Marcus, but her lawyer's face was a mask of confusion. This wasn't part of the plan. The red folder was handed to the bench, and for 3 grueling minutes, the only sound was the rhythmic flipping of paper. Julian leaned toward Elena. His voice a venomous thread meant only for her ears. "I told you, Elena. You play in the mud, you get dirty. Whatever's in that folder, it's going to bury you. Elena didn't blink. Then we'll be buried together, Julian. I'm already used to the dark. Judge Vance finally looked up, her expression unreadable. It appears, she began, that the divorce decree finalized 3 years ago was never properly recorded in the state S-Master Registry. Due to a technical glitch during the merger of the county databases, the signature of the presiding official was never digitized. Which means, Marcus asked, his voice tight. Which means, the judge said, looking directly at Julian. In the eyes of the law, the marriage was never dissolved. Elena Valerius is not your ex-wife. She is, and has been for the last 3 years, your legal spouse. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a predator realizing the cage door had been locked from the inside. If they were still married, every cent Julian had moved, every private investment he had made, and every contract he had signed without her co-signature was a violation of marital property law. The $200 million wasn't just hidden. It was stolen from his own wife. Julian's lawyer was the first to recover. Your Honor, this is a clerical error that can be rectified with a simple, retroactive filing. Actually, Elena spoke up, her voice ringing clearer than it ever had in their home. If we are married, then I have the right to an immediate injunction on all Valerius Holdings accounts to prevent further mismanagement of our joint assets. Julian's face turned a shade of purple that made the veins in his neck bulge. You wouldn't dare. You don't even know how to read a balance sheet. I learned a lot in the countryside, Julian, she said, standing to face him. Mostly, I learned how to wait. Clara, still on the witness stand, clutched the railing. The papers, she croaked. The ones he tried to burn. They weren't just bank statements. They were titles to the properties in France. He put them in his mistress's name 6 months ago. Julian whirled around toward Clara, his finger pointed like a weapon. You're a liar and a thief. I'll have you, Mr. Valerius. The judge barked. Control yourself. This court is now in emergency session. Clerk, fetch the bailiff. I want the digital logs for the Nightingale Trust brought to my chambers immediately. Just as the bailiff stepped forward, Julian's phone on the table began to vibrate violently. He glanced at the screen, and for the first time, Elena saw true, unadulterated panic in his eyes. He didn't just look at the phone, he looked at the exit. Julian, his lawyer whispered, sensing the shift. Julian didn't answer. He looked at Elena, his mouth opening to say something, perhaps a threat. Perhaps a plea, but the words were cut off by the sound of the courtroom side speakers crackling to life. Your Honor, a voice came through the intercom from the clerk's office. We have a problem with the digital logs. They're being deleted in real time. The announcement from the intercom hit the room like a cold front. Julian's lawyer scrambled to grab the phone, but Julian was faster. He slammed his palm over the device, his breathing ragged. The mental fragility he had spent years projecting onto Elena was now manifesting in his own frantic movements. Someone is remotely accessing the server. The voice over the intercom continued, sounding increasingly desperate. We're losing the ledger for the Nightingale Trust. If it wipes, the paper trail for the offshore accounts vanishes. Judge Vance slammed her gavel with a force that echoed like a gunshot. Bailiffs, secure all electronic devices on the defense table immediately. Clerk, tell IT to pull the hard line now. Elena watched the chaos with a strange, detached clarity. She felt Marcus grip her arm, his knuckles tense. If those files go, our proof of his fraud goes with them, he whispered. But Elena wasn't looking at the computers. She was looking at Julian's hand. He wasn't just hiding his phone. He was tapping a specific sequence on the back of the case. A haptic code. He's not waiting for someone else to do it, Elena said, her voice cutting through the panic. She stood up, ignoring Marcus's attempt to keep her seated. He's doing it himself. The phone is the bridge. That's a baseless accusation. Julian's lawyer roared, though he backed away from his client, as if Julian were suddenly radioactive. The bailiff moved toward Julian, but Julian stepped back, his eyes darting toward the gallery. "It's my private property. You have no warrant to seize my personal communications." "This is a court of law, Mr. Valerius, and you are under an emergency injunction," Judge Vance warned. "Hand over the device, or I will hold you in immediate contempt." Julian looked at the judge, then at the bailiff, and finally at Elena. The mask of the grieving, noble husband finally shattered. A jagged, ugly sneer replaced it. "You think you've won because of a filing error? You're a footnote in my life, Elena. You always were. Even if you get the money, you'll never have the codes. You'll be a queen of a kingdom that's locked tight." "I don't need a kingdom, Julian," Elena said, walking slowly toward the bar that separated them. "I just need the truth. And Clara already told us you tried to burn it. You're a master of fire, but you forgot one thing." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "Fire leaves ash, and ash can be red." Julian laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "Cryptic to the end. That's why I left you. You were always so dramatic." He turned to the bailiff, holding the phone out as if to surrender it. But as the officer reached for it, Julian's thumb pressed firmly into the center of the screen. "Oops, wrong password too many times. It's encrypted now. Good luck with the FBI." The screen went black. The intercom fell silent. The digital trail was dead. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room. Julian's lawyer exhaled, a sound of immense relief. Without the digital logs, the case for $200 million was a he-said, she-said battle that could drag on for a decade time Elena didn't have. Julian straightened his tie, the predator's smugness returning. "Well, since we've reached an impasse, perhaps we can discuss a settlement. Something small. For old time's sake." Elena didn't look defeated. She looked at the red folder still sitting on the judge's bench. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "if the digital records are gone, we must rely on the physical ones. The ones Julian didn't know existed." "What physical records?" Julian snapped. "There are none." "The ones in the red folder," Elena said, pointing. "The clerk didn't just bring the marriage registry, he brought the secondary filing." Judge Vance opened the folder to the final page. Her eyes widened. "Mr. Valerius, it appears there is a third party listed on the original holdings agreement. Someone you added as a silent beneficiary to bypass taxes." Julian's brow furrowed. "That's impossible. I'm the sole owner." "Not according to this," the judge said, "and the beneficiary is in this building." The back doors opened again. This time, it wasn't a clerk. It was a woman Elena recognized instantly, the one person Julian feared more than the law. The woman who entered the courtroom carried an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. She was dressed in a charcoal silk suit that cost more than Julian's car, her silver hair pinned back in a severe, elegant bun. It was Lydia Valerius, Julian's mother, and the true architect of the Valerius Empire. Julian's jaw dropped. The arrogance he had displayed seconds ago vanished, replaced by the hollow look of a boy caught in a lie. "Mother? What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Zurich." Lydia didn't look at him. She walked straight to the plaintiff's table and stood beside Elena. The silence in the room was so thick it was suffocating. Lydia reached into her leather clutch, pulled out a pair of gold-rimmed reading glasses, and looked at the judge. "Your Honor," Lydia said, her voice like velvet-trapped steel, "my son has always had a problem with the concept of shared assets. He seems to believe that a name on a marquee makes him the sole owner of the theater." "Lydia, sit down," Julian hissed, his voice cracking. "This is a private legal matter between me and Elena. It ceased to be private when you used the Valerius family trust to fund your little Nightingale project." Lydia replied, finally turning to face him. Her gaze was chilling. "I spent 40 years building this reputation. I will not have it dismantled by a man who thinks infidelity is a business strategy." The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Valerius, the clerk's report indicates a third-party beneficiary on the original holdings. Is that you? It is, Lydia confirmed. A clause I insisted upon when Julian took the helm. Any major divestment requires the signature of the primary shareholder, the spouse, and the trustee. That would be me. She turned her sharp gaze to Julian. I never signed those transfer papers to the offshore accounts, Julian, which means those signatures are forgeries. The gallery gasped. Forgery was a criminal offense, a felony that would shift this case from a civil dispute to a prison sentence.
Oh.
Julian's lawyer looked like he wanted to vanish into the floorboards. I have the documents, Julian stammered, his eyes darting toward the exit. They were notarized. By a notary you bribed, Elena added, stepping closer to him. She felt the fear she had carried for years finally dissolving, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged strength. You thought I was too broken to look. You thought that by sending me to the countryside with nothing, I would eventually just ... disappear. But silence isn't absence, Julian. It's observation. Lydia placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. It was the first time in 10 years the woman had shown her a grain of affection, but Elena knew it wasn't about love. It was about respect for a survivor. Your Honor, Lydia continued, I have the original, untampered ledgers in my possession. They were not on the digital server Julian just wiped. I kept them in a physical vault. Julian's face went a sickly shade of gray. He reached for his briefcase, but the bailiff blocked his path. The power was shifting, the momentum swinging toward Elena with the force of a tidal wave. If this is true, Judge Vance said, her voice grim, then the Nightingale Trust is not just marital property. It is evidence of grand larceny. There's one more thing, Lydia said, her eyes flashing with a predatory glint. The person Julian was communicating with on his phone just now. The one helping him wipe the servers ... I know exactly where she is. Just as Lydia was about to reveal the name, a loud, rhythmic thudding sounded from the ceiling. Dust shook from the chandeliers. What is that? Someone shouted from the gallery. A security guard burst through the side doors. Your Honor, we have a security breach in the building's basement. Someone has cut the main power lines. The lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged the entire courtroom into pitch-black darkness. Darkness in a courtroom feels different than darkness in a home. It is heavy, clinical, and fraught with the unseen. The immediate silence was broken by the sharp, metallic snap of a briefcase closing and the frantic shuffling of feet. Nobody move. The bailiff's voice boomed, followed by the click of a heavy-duty flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, dancing across the panicked faces of the gallery before settling on the defense table. Julian was gone, headed for the service exit. Clara shouted, pointing toward the small door behind the witness stand. Elena didn't wait for the bailiff, driven by a surge of adrenaline that overridden years of learned submission. She grabbed a flashlight from the court clerk's desk and bolted toward the side door. She could hear the heavy thud of Julian's designer loafers echoing in the stairwell ahead. Elena, wait. Marcus's voice trailed off behind her, lost to the chaos of the courtroom. She hit the stairwell, the air here colder and smelling of damp concrete. The beam of her light caught Julian 2 flights down. He wasn't the composed CEO anymore. He was a cornered animal, his jacket discarded, his tie hanging loose like a noose. Give it up, Julian, Elena yelled, her voice echoing off the narrow walls. My mother-in-law has the ledgers. There is nowhere for the money to go. Julian stopped on the landing and turned. In the harsh glare of the flashlight, his eyes looked hollow. You think this is about the money now? It's about the legacy, Elena. I won't let you and that bitter old woman turn me into a cautionary tale. You did that to yourself the moment you thought I was disposable, she countered, descending the steps slowly, keeping the light fixed on his face. You were always so self-righteous, he spat, reaching into his pocket. You think you're the hero. You enjoyed the luxury. You wore the diamonds. You were a willing participant in the lie until the lie stopped favoring you. I was a prisoner of a version of myself you created, Elena said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. But that version died in the countryside. I'm the one who walked out of the grave. Julian pulled a small black drive from his pocket. The physical ledgers Lydia has. They're incomplete. This is the decryption key for the Nightingale sub-accounts. Without this, the $200 million stays in limbo forever. Nobody gets it. Not the court, not Lydia, and especially not you. He held the drive over the gap in the center of the stairwell, a 4-story drop to a concrete basement. Drop it, and you're adding destruction of evidence to forgery and larceny, Elena warned, stepping onto the landing. A small price to pay to see the look on your face, Julian sneered. But as his fingers loosened, a shadow moved in the corner of the landing. A hand reached out of the darkness and gripped Julian's wrist with the force of a vice. I believe that belongs to the estate, Julian, a woman's voice whispered. It wasn't Lydia. It was a younger woman, her face partially obscured by a surgical mask. Wearing the same gray housekeeper's uniform as Clara. Julian gasped, his grip failing as the woman twisted his arm. The drive didn't fall down the stairwell. It landed with a soft thud at Elena's feet. The woman stepped into the light, pulling off her mask. Elena's breath hitched. It was Sophia Julian's missing mistress, the woman he had supposedly moved the assets to. Sophia, Julian gasped, clutching his arm. What are you doing? I gave you everything. You gave me a target on my back, Julian, Sophia said, her eyes cold. You didn't put those houses in my name to gift them to me. You put them there so I'd take the fall when the IRS came knocking. She looked at Elena, a silent understanding passing between the two women who had both been used as pawns by the same man. Before Julian could respond, the heavy fire doors at the bottom of the stairs burst open. The police had arrived. But as the officers flooded the stairwell, Sophia leaned in and whispered something to Elena that turned her blood to ice. The money isn't just in the accounts, Elena. Look at the wedding ring he's still wearing. The stairwell was suddenly flooded with the harsh, artificial glare of tactical flashlights. Officers swarmed the landing, their boots thundering against the metal grates. Julian was forced against the concrete wall, his cheek pressed into the grit, his hands zip-tied behind his back. Elena stood frozen, her eyes locked on Julian's left hand. The wedding band, a thick, platinum circle she had placed on his finger 5 years ago, glinted under the police lights. It looked like any other piece of high-end jewelry, but Sophia's words echoed in her mind. The money isn't just in the accounts. Elena, get back, Marcus shouted, emerging from the doorway above, breathless. The police have him. It's not over, Elena whispered. She stepped toward the officers. Wait, before you take him, I need that ring. Julian struggled, his voice a panicked rasp. It's my personal property. You can't take it. Elena, don't you dare. It was bought with marital funds, Julian, Elena said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. Technically, half of it belongs to me, and right now, I'm claiming my share. One of the officers looked at the judge, who had followed the crowd into the stairwell. Judge Vance nodded slowly. Given the flight risk and the allegations of asset concealment, the court authorizes the seizure of all high-value items on the defendant's person. The officer slid the ring off Julian's finger. It was surprisingly heavy. He handed it to Elena. She turned it over in her palm, feeling the weight. On the interior band, where there should have been an engraving of their wedding date, there was nothing but a smooth, seamless surface. She looked at Sophia, who remained leaning against the railing, her expression one of grim satisfaction. Sophia reached out and took the ring from Elena's hand. With a practiced twist of the inner bezel mechanism hidden to the naked eye, the platinum band clicked and separated into two pieces. Tucked inside a microscopic hollow was not a diamond or a jewel, but a sliver of translucent polymer. a cold storage hardware wallet. The $200 million wasn't just moved to the Nightingale Trust, Sophia explained to the stunned room. The trust was a decoy, a trail of breadcrumbs for the lawyers to follow, while the real wealth was converted into untraceable cryptocurrency. He's been wearing the entire Valerius fortune on his finger for months. Julian slumped against the wall, the fight finally leaving him. He looked at the floor, his face a mask of ruined ambition. "You were supposed to be the quiet one," he muttered to Elena. "You were supposed to stay in the country and fade away." "I did fade," Elena replied, leaning in close so only he could hear. "I faded into the person who was smart enough to stop believing your lies. You forgot that you didn't just marry a girl, Julian. You married a partner. I learned your business. I learned your habits. And eventually, I learned your greed." "Take him away," Judge Vance ordered. As the police led Julian down the stairs, the gallery of socialites and reporters began to scramble, sensing the massive shift in the social hierarchy. The abandoned wife was now the woman holding the key to a $200 million empire. Lydia Valerius walked down the stairs, her heels clicking with a finality that silenced the remaining whispers. She stood before Elena and Sophia. "The lawyers will have a field day with this," Lydia said, her eyes on the hardware wallet. "But the Valerius name is still on that door. Elena, we need to discuss the restructuring of the board." "The board?" Elena asked, a cold smile forming. "Lydia, I don't want a seat at the table." Lydia frowned. "Then what do you want?" Elena looked at the red folder in Marcus's hand, then at the hardware wallet. "I want the table itself. And I want everyone who sat at it while I was being exiled to leave the room." Before Lydia could respond, Elena's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was an anonymous text. "Check the basement locker 402. He didn't just hide the money, he hid the girl." The cryptic message on Elena's screen felt like a physical weight. He hid the girl. Elena looked at the hardware wallet in her hand, the digital ghost of Julian S. Greedent. Then at the dark, yawning mouth of the basement level. Julian was being loaded into a transport van outside, but the air still tasted of his secrets. "Elena, what is it?" Marcus asked, noticing her sudden stillness. "I need to check the basement lockers," Elena said, her voice tight. "Locker 402. Lydia stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "The basement is for maintenance and archival storage." "Elena, there's nothing down there but dust and old litigation files. We have the money. We have the confession. Let the police handle the rest." "The police are looking for assets, Lydia." "I'm looking for the truth," Elena countered. She didn't wait for permission. She headed down the final flight of stairs, the beam of her flashlight cutting through the thick, stagnant air of the sub-basement. The lockers were caged in wire mesh, a long row of rusted green metal. She counted them down. 400, 401, 402. The lock wasn't a standard padlock. It was a high-end biometric scanner, blinking with a faint, red light. Elena felt a chill. Why would a storage locker in a public courthouse have a private security override? She pressed her thumb to the glass. It turned green instantly. Julian hadn't just used her name for his trusts. He had used her biometrics as the ultimate failsafe, knowing she would never be allowed near his private dealings. The door creaked open. Inside was not a person, but a mountain of specialized crates. Elena opened the nearest one. It wasn't money. It was original, hand-drafted blueprints and land deeds for a project called New Eden, a massive private development built on land that had been seized from the very countryside village where Julian had exiled her. "He didn't just send me there to get rid of me," Elena whispered, her voice trembling as she realized the depth of the betrayal. "He sent me there to scout. I was his unwitting surveyor." She realized then what the girl meant. Hidden behind the crates was a small, tattered backpack. She pulled it out and opened it. Inside were the identification papers and a passport for a girl named Maya. Attached to the passport was a DNA test result. Elena's heart stopped. The father was Julian. The mother was a woman from the village who had died in a tragic accident 2 years ago. He was going to take her, a voice said from the shadows. Elena whirled around. Sophia was standing by the locker door, her face pale. Julian didn't just want the wealth, Elena. He wanted a legacy he could control from the ground up. He's been keeping that child in a private boarding school under a fake name, waiting for the divorce to clear so he could adopt his own daughter and present himself as the reformed, doting father. He killed her mother, Elena said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow.
Oh.
The construction accident at the village site. She was the one holdout who wouldn't sell her land. He's more than a thief, Elena Sophia said, her voice breaking. He's a ghost maker. A sudden, sharp, metallic clink echoed through the basement. The heavy fire door at the entrance of the locker room hissed shut. Elena. Marcus's voice muffled through the door. Someone's locked the manual override from the outside. I can't get it open. Through the small, reinforced glass window of the door, Elena saw a shadow move. It wasn't Julian. It was his lead counsel, the man who had been whispering in Julian's ear all morning. He held a canister of something marked industrial solvent and a lighter. The files stay in the locker. Mrs. Valerius, the lawyer, shouted through the glass. And so do the witnesses. The scent of accelerant seeped through the vents, sharp and suffocating. Behind the reinforced glass, Julian's lawyer struck the lighter. The small flame danced, a tiny spark poised to erase a decade of corruption. You're burning the evidence, Arthur, Elena screamed, slamming her palms against the glass. But you can't burn the truth. It's already out. In a courtroom, truth is what survives the fire, Arthur replied, his face distorted by the flickering light. He tilted the canister. Wait. Elena held up the hardware wallet, pressing it against the glass. You want the money. Julian's gone. If you burn this room, the keys to the $200 million vanish with us. You'll be a murderer with empty pockets. The lawyer hesitated. Greed, the very thing that had built Julian's empire, was now its undoing. In that second of hesitation, the heavy fire door shuddered. A massive, echoing boom rocked the basement as a hydraulic ram splintered the frame. The police, alerted by Marcus and the courthouse, security burst through. Arthur was tackled before the flame could touch the floor. Elena and Sophia stumbled out into the hallway, coughing and gasping for the sterile, recycled air of the courthouse. 1 hour later, the main courtroom was no longer a place of trial, but a scene of final reckoning. The lights were back on, shining brilliantly on the mahogany and brass. Julian had been brought back in, now flanked by federal agents. Elena walked to the center of the room. She didn't look like a victim. She didn't even look like a wife. She looked like a woman who had finally cleared the fog from her own eyes. She held the tattered backpack from the locker, the evidence of a life Julian had tried to treat as an asset. Julian, she said, her voice steady and echoing. You told me I was a footnote. You told me I was fragile. But you were the one who was so afraid of the truth that you had to build a fortress of lies just to stand tall. Julian looked at the backpack, his face crumbling. The reveal of his secret daughter was the final blow to his carefully curated reputation. Elena, please, ... we can fix this. For the family name. The family name doesn't belong to you anymore, Elena said. She turned to Judge Vance. Your Honor, I am filing for an immediate seizure of all assets under the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. I don't want the $200 million for myself. I am establishing a trust for the village Julian tried to destroy and for Maya. Lydia Valerius stood at the back of the room, watching her son be led away in shame. She nodded once to Elena's silent surrender of the Valerius crown. Elena walked toward the great mahogany doors. She stopped at the threshold, the same place she had stood trembling only hours ago. Marcus walked up beside her. "Where will you go? You're the most powerful woman in the city now." Elena looked out at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set over the skyline. "I spent 3 years being told where to stay and who to be. I think I'll start by going wherever I want." She reached into her pocket, pulled out her old wedding ring, the simple gold one Julian had replaced with the wealth ring, and placed it on the clerk's desk. It was just a piece of metal now. "Cruelty is loud," Elena murmured, her voice a soft, shareable truth that seemed to vibrate through the room. "But self-respect is quiet. And tonight, for the first time, I finally hear myself." She stepped out into the crisp evening air, leaving the court and the ghost of her marriage behind. She wasn't just a survivor. She was the architect of her own future.